OCCRP is it's kind of a unique organization. It's a network of independent investigative reporting organizations, some commercial media and journalists. And we're a platform for investigative reporting. We're like the Uber of investigative reporting. We don't have our own journalists. We borrow them from member centers. We're editors, we're technicians, we're researchers. And basically we try to provide a platform, resources, editing, everything that people need to build strong cross-border investigative reporting stories. We can be successful because we have reporters in all the countries we're working. You know, if you've got good people locally and you're looking at cross-border stories, they can use their local expertise to find the information you need. When you have two sets in two different countries, what they can't find, they can find in another country and vice versa. And so it really is, being able to leverage the skills across borders. It's looking for information in places where you might not normally look if you're a local reporter.
Where do you see investigative critical journalism is at this stage, and how do you see the future of it?
Well, I think, we're somewhat in a great renaissance of investigative reporting. I think there's more good investigative reporting that's been done than any time in the history of modern journalism. I think there's also a lot of challenges, and while there's many reporters out there, what's made that possible, I think, is that reporters worked in news media, they worked in commercial stations, and now they've been freed because the money has dried up. They've been able to go into nonprofits, and they've been able to set up centers to do exactly what they want to do. And that's led to this great renaissance in investigative reporting. But the problem is increasingly we are the nail that sticks up. And that nail attracts a lot of hammers. And those hammers are, organized crime, corrupt governments, businesses, international businesses, that don't want critical looks at what they're doing. And so it's become harder and harder to do reporting. There's more reporters killed, there's more reporters sued, there's less resources than ever before, even though there are more reporters working and doing stuff and cooperating. So, we probably have about 1% of the amount of funds and resources that we need to do the job. And the people we're competing against are propagandists and state-controlled companies and state-controlled media and media owned by oligarchs friendly with the various dictators around the world. And they have billions of dollars. And so they're hurt more than we are, although for the amount of resources we have, we're hurt pretty well.
So I'm also aware that you are working with an NGO like Transparency International. Mm-hmm. Would that be possible 10 years ago?
No, I think as journalism has changed, it's opened different ways of thinking about things. We had a very orthodox way of seeing journalism, where journalists did this and they didn't do this, and they weren't really involved in anti-corruption work. They just kind of told the truth, in their narrow view of the world. And I think that's changed. I think we understand now that we're part of a larger current, and that we need to work with activists. I'm not saying, be swayed by them or to necessarily adopt their views of the world, but we need to work with them, and we need to educate them, and we need to work together to be more efficient in transferring information, from journalists to activists to ultimately police. Because there's many places in the world the world is becoming more and more corrupt. And there's fewer and fewer tools to fight that corruption. And the corruption and the crime is globalized and moves very efficiently across borders, but law enforcement doesn't. And so it's the Wild West in the international scene. And that's allowed criminals to grow and prosper. It's allowed people to move money around. It's allowed to set up offshores so that people can hide wealth and do corruption. And that's led to a similar renaissance or boom in corruption worldwide. And people are getting better at corruption. They're sharing how to be corrupt. And that's made it a very, very difficult world. And we are really the only natural predator of corruption on the global scale. And so, it's not law enforcement. There is no world police. It's investigative reporters working across borders. It is a paradigm change. I think, and we have new things in journalism. I mean, we have bloggers, for the first time, and we have citizen journalists. And so, the places where people can get information is a lot larger, and journalism is drowned out by the many different places. And people are talking directly to people now. So you can go to a government website and you can see what the government says. You don't have to get that through a journalist anymore. So we used to be a gatekeeper. Now there's 1,000 doors. And we're not at every one of them. Azerbaijan is a really interesting example. Just recently there was a court ruling in Paris as the country sued a journalist for calling it a dictatorship, and the journalist, of course, won. That's something we've known for a long time. Azerbaijan is a dictatorship. It's run by one family, the Aliyev family, who control most of the economy. They control the banking sector. They have most of the high-end hotels. They own the mining industry. So they control the construction. They control a significant part of the economy. And they also control the media. And so they've decided that they're not going to broker any disagreement with who they are and what they do. And so the reporters, who were fighting against this, were the real, nails sticking out of the ground, and they were pounded heavily by the government and essentially closed all independent media. The last one closed very recently, and that leaves no independent media left. So now we have to cover the country from outside using reporters, some of who are still working inside. But it's made it a very difficult situation. And the reporters who have left the country have often had family members arrested in their stead. And so the government it's typically in charge of hooliganism or drug trafficking or something like that. And they've put dozens of family members in prison to basically punish those that are outside. And it's just the worst possible situation for journalism. We've continued to do work. We did the Hadija project when they arrested our reporter, Hadija Ismailova. And we basically said, if you're going to arrest our reporter, we're going to come in with many more reporters and do the work that she would have done. So we've continued to do stories on Azerbaijan. It's an important focus for us. We feel that when all other media is not available, it's our job as investigative reporters to tell people what's going on. We've done a little work on Turkey, and I mean, Turkey is an interesting case because it really, I think there's a 10-year rule that when people have been in charge of a country for 10 years, they start going nuts. And they start seeing themselves as the country, and that's essentially what Erdogan has done. And Turkey had one of the most vibrant media industries in the world. Turkish newspapers sold very well. There was a large number of them that were competing. They all sold well. And after the alleged coup attempt, the government has used that as an excuse to crack down on journalists, and they've arrested a large number of journalists who were in the coup. There's other private practices. Reporters, behind the scenes, the government is putting pressure on people and threatening to close them so that they self-censor. And journalists I know that are working in Turkey basically will often say, I can't do that story, or I'll lose my job, or the newspaper will get closed. So it's now a overt pressure by the government on a number of Turkish media. And that's just very sad because, there seems to be a playbook. We call it the Russian playbook, but, it's a playbook on how to capture a state. And one of the first steps is to capture the media.
I heard people with a lot of experience talking about a rethinking of what is journalism.
Yeah, I think journalism has traditionally been a commercial revenue, a commercial service that does public good, but those models are dead. Advertising is on the internet is not taken over advertising that was on newspapers, and so consequently advertising has been dropping significantly. Most of the money for advertising now is going to commercial technology companies like Google and Facebook and others. And so consequently, the media has had a significant hit on resources, and it's basically dying for all practical purposes. And there's nothing in the future that would indicate that model is going to change and get better. And so consequently, it's going to die. And, that's depressing, but there's still a need for it. The public service element of it is vital. And so how do we solve this issue of providing a public service when there isn't really a model? And it's something we have to solve. We think the public will give money to get information. They haven't to date because it's been offered for free on the internet. But when we get to the point where we can't do that anymore, there's going to have to be a significant change in the model. And so I see a place where there's more interplay between the public and the media. And that allows us to be a true public service. And I think, if people had to pay $5 a month or, $3 a month, depending on what country you're in, that they'll do that. And if they do that, there's plenty of money for, all the journalism that we need. And I think that's where we're going. And I think that we need to find that location. And that's what really the future of journalism is. It won't be, two-dimensional story anymore. It'll be some interactive thing that's data-rich, maybe graphics, maybe video, and so they can interact and find the information they need and ask questions in a natural language way to find out the results that they need. Think of it as maybe a Google search engine on steroids. Right. Well, the interesting thing is if you look at how privacy in general, privacy is dying. It's very difficult now to not exist in the world, to hide everything you want to do. And, I was talking to satellite photos people, and they were saying that within 5 years that not only will we have satellite coverage of the whole planet, we will have video coverage of every place on the planet 24 hours a day. Now, if you think about that, I mean, that's completely destroying privacy. So your walls are spying on you, and people are watching you 24 hours a day. So really, crime is not the problem in the future. It's corruption. Governments are going to be able to get rid of all crime because they can see, everything that's happening. So if you're a bad person and you want to do something, what do? You become a politician. You look to capture states. So once the state becomes actually the greatest fear in your life.